Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining. If you're part of the SAP Concur community, then you're not starting from scratch. You're operating one of the most mature spend and expense ecosystems in the market. Today's not about questioning that. Today's about exploring how Soldo adds value to that. I'm not a Concur user today, but I have been in previous roles, so probably spent about the last 10, 12 years using Concur. So I know it as a user. What I'm going to cover over the course of this webinar, probably the next 30, 35 minutes, why is decentralized spend an issue and what is it? We'll talk about the Soldo partnership with SAP Concur. We'll talk about what Soldo brings to the partnership, who does which bit of the puzzle. I'll take you through a case study and then we'll look at what's next, and there's time for Q&A as we go through. So who is Soldo? We are an Anglo-Italian company with approximately 25,000 customers across Europe. We provide payment cards, both physical and virtual, or you can make payments via bank transfer. We are an SAP Concur app partner, and we're deeply integrated into Concur, and we'll talk more about that as we go through. What we offer is a software platform with payment mechanisms and reporting mechanisms, but it's built on top of the fact that we are a licensed electronic money institution. We're regulated in the UK, and we're also regulated in Ireland for passporting through the rest of Europe. So let's start by looking at SAP Concur. Concur already provides significant control. You can configure your approval workflows. You can enforce expense policies at time of submission of the expense. You integrate directly into SAP's ERP systems. You can maintain audit trails, track travel and expense through the modules. And for many organizations, implementing that has been a huge leap forward. Expense management became structured, became governed, and became compliant. This is not about replacing that layer, but it's about strengthening what happens before you reach that point in the process. Now, the process is digitized. Here's the nuance. SAP Concur governs the process of expense submission and approval extremely well. And of course, the other side of it is the pre-expense booking controls with travel policies. But in many organizations, in fact, I'd say in most organizations, the payment still happens before. So the payment happens first. An employee could use a corporate card or a purchasing card, or they pay out of pocket using their own credit cards, or even in some cases, they're using cash. Then the expense is submitted into Concur. Control is therefore applied at the time of submission. That timing is important because when control begins after spend, finance is reactive by design. So what I'd say is many organizations have digitized expense reporting. Very few have digitized spending. So where does friction still show up? Even in organizations with strong SAP Concur governance, we still see this friction. Corporate cards will often have static credit limits, limited controls over merchants and where you can spend, limited alignment to budgets for projects or customers or clients or however your structure is needed to be reflected. Purchasing cards allow agility, but real-time budget alignment is again often external to Concur. And when decentralized spend sits across corporate cards and purchasing cards and petty cash and reimbursements, finance is only seeing the full picture at submission or at statement time. That's not a Concur limitation, it's a structural sequence issue. So let's look into this different type of spend. We at Soldo define it as two types of spend, two very different challenges. So the problem that we solve today, finance teams are great at managing centralized procurement, but the majority of spend happens elsewhere, in marketing, in operations, field teams, sales teams out on the road, and more. So this is decentralized spend, that small, frequent, high cadence of spending, even if the overall value is lower, and it's largely unmanaged. In addition, something we've seen from some research we ran last year is what we call a trust paradox. And there's an interesting paradox in this, in how companies handle trust and the spending of money. So what we saw was that 86% of senior leaders said they trust employees with company money, and 93% of employees said they feel trusted to spend money. But 76% of those same leaders admit that their organizations have missed growth opportunities because employees didn't have access to the right budgets. This comes from some research that we ran last year called the Soldo Productivity Index, and I will share a link in the slides, which will be shared with you at the end if you want to look into more detail. This is sort of the high level. So let's look at that. 73% of companies saying that finance processes can stop them from pursuing new opportunities, and 76%, 3 in 4, saying they missed an opportunity as a direct result of employees not having access to the correct budgets. Now, you set that against a situation today where modern finance teams are expected to support growth, they have to improve forecasting, they're expected to strengthen compliance, and they have to increase agility all at the same time. So research is showing that this is a challenge. So the issue is really about whether spending itself is designed to support the speed of the business without sacrificing control. So the shift that we're talking about is a shift from reactive governance to proactive control. So in a reactive model, spend happens, the expense is submitted into SAP Concur, the policy is applied, and if there are exceptions, they are flagged at that point in the process. What we're proposing is a shift to go from reactive governance to proactive control. And in that proactive model, budgets are allocated in advance, controls are embedded at the time of payment, spend is aligned to a cost center or a project or a customer at source, and the review process becomes validation, not discovery. This does not replace Concur. What it does is it reduces the noise inside Concur. So let's talk about what Soldo brings to an SAP Concur environment. First off, as I've said, to recap, Soldo, what do we provide? We provide payment cards, physical and virtual, or you can make payments by bank transfer. When I say virtual cards, I mean you can tokenize your card and present it within Apple's Apple Wallet, Apple Pay, or Google's Wallet through Google Pay. So you have the choice to use the physical card or use it virtually on a phone, for example. We, of course, offer a software platform that has payment mechanisms built in, and all of this is built on top of a licensed electronic money institution. At the back end, we integrate into a huge range of different software packages, and we'll talk more about that in a moment, but particularly things like HR systems, ERP systems, accounting systems, travel and expense booking systems, and many, many others. So what does this look like in an SAP Concur ecosystem? First, we bring in the concept of governance before payment. Instead of policy living only in expense rules, spending rules are embedded at the card or wallet level. Second, payment instruments are aligned to the organization structure. So you allocate cards to those who need them, you allocate the ability to make bank transfers to those who need them, and you have complete control and governance around what payments they can make. So just giving somebody a card doesn't automatically expose you to any kind of risk, because you can control what they spend, what they're allowed to spend on using that card. So instead of blanket sort of crude card limits, you have budgets that reflect your teams, your projects, campaigns if it's a marketing part of the organization, or locations. So you may have remote locations that need flexibility. All of that is built in to the payment instruments that are aligned to that org structure. And then finally, talking about real-time visibility. So transactions as they're made are visible instantly, and then they flow cleanly into SAP Concur for expense validation and reporting. This strengthens Concur's role in the organization, increasing its value even further. Let's take a quick look at the Soldo ecosystem and what's contained within that. So you can customize Soldo to match how your business is structured. You can set up wallets, you can set up rules and regulations and policy compliance that matches to how your organization is structured. So you can have, for example, I might be enabled to spend at a certain time of the day, but not in the evening, or I might be allowed to spend a certain amount because I'm in sales department. Somebody in finance team might be permitted to spend a lower amount. You can literally get granular control that reflects exactly how your business is structured. It can be geographical, so you can have control over where somebody can spend. So I can spend in the UK and Italy, but I can't spend in Spain because I wouldn't be going to Spain on business. It could be categorical, so I can spend on food and drink, but I can't buy exhibition stand space. That's reserved for the marketing operations team, for example. You can delegate that payment authority. So in particular, you can assign cards to everyone within your organization, but switch on and off the ability to spend, and you can do that instantaneously. You can allocate the ability to make payments by bank transfer, and then you can delegate that down through the organization, have people allowed to make payments by bank transfer, but only to a certain subset of suppliers, or only up to a certain amount per day, per week, or just a finite limit. You define your policies, and Soldo will reflect that within the workflows within the product. Then you reconcile the expenditure automatically. And finally, as I said, you link the systems, link the expense and Soldo data into the systems that your business uses, be that ERP, accounting, HR, travel and expense systems, travel booking systems, and plenty more. We link to somewhere in the region of nearly 1,000 different third-party applications. In an environment where you have Concur and Soldo, who's doing what? Let's look at the typical setup that we tend to see. So first off, you have a request that's submitted within Concur. So I'm going to travel to a particular location. I need flight, I need a train ticket to the airport at both ends. I need a hotel when I get there, potentially some money for expenditure while I'm traveling. That request gets approved. Let's say I've made it with I've made the request within policy, and then what happens is Concur will generate what we in Soldo called a business trip request. So that business trip is then transferred into Soldo, and the funds are made available to the user, and that can be controlled. You need to book the flight in advance, so the money's made available for the flight immediately, but you only pay the hotel when you actually stay there on the day of checkout, so that those funds can be made available at the time that they're needed. If there's something that happens, a last minute flight cancellation and you need additional cash, you can easily just raise a request in the app and it gets approved and the funds are allocated straight away. So the funds have been made available in line with the request that was generated in Concur. Within Soldo, the user is using the payment mechanism. So they use the Soldo card or virtual card to make a transaction. You buy a flight, or you book a train ticket, or whatever the expense happens to be. That transaction gets authorized, and then that authorized transaction is passed directly into SAP Concur, which is where you're going to be doing the reporting. So that the transaction is authorized, the information is passed back to SAP Concur, which is the process is in development at the moment. It's been created on the Soldo side. We're just waiting for an update to the Concur API to have that be live. And then the user gets notified in the Concur application that the expense has been conducted. They add the receipt, and then they can submit the receipt as per usual within Concur. Soldo settles the transaction. We've authorized it. It's all okay. We make the payment to the merchant, and then the settled transaction is passed back into the SAP Concur environment, and the expense record is updated. So it goes from authorized to settled. And then the user within Concur sends the expense for review. Assuming all is good, the expense is reviewed, and then it can be transferred into the financial system. So a really clean break between the payment mechanisms and payment controls that are delivered within Soldo, and then the reporting and policy compliance within SAP Concur. So if we look at that as end-to-end, we have literally the full level of control all the way through. The payment control delivered by Soldo using our payment mechanism and our granular payment controls, and the requests and reporting continuing to be done through SAP Concur, as you are probably doing today. So let's look at a case study of a Soldo customer, and I'll give you some numbers of what kinds of returns this particular organization have achieved. So the organization is called Urban Bubble. There are about 450 people across the UK. They are one of the largest operators of build-to-rent property in the UK. Now, when they came to us, they were already using an expense management platform, but as the organization was scaling, they found that the friction between payment and management was increasing. Different sites, and they have multiple sites across the country, were drawing from the same pot of money. The net effect was that reconciliation was becoming very time consuming. It was taking them an awful long time to reconcile expenses. Cash flow was distorted by the recharge process. And then what they wanted to do was to improve that so that they could get better transparency of what each part of the organization was doing, allocate more control, drive that policy compliance down to the edge of the organization. So by aligning their budget and payment controls at the source using Soldo, they were able to improve working cash flow by 70%. They tell us they've saved 2 working days per month on reconciliation. And importantly, they did not remove any expense management. It made that expense layer cleaner, and that's their theme today. So they are actually benefiting from easier cash flow around the organization, but at the same time, they're able to have wallets per each of the properties. So each property has access to its own funding, and they're able to retain control to a much greater level than they were in the past. So for organizations that are SAP heavy, the benefits of using Soldo alongside SAP Concur are, I think, highly tangible. Expense lines that enter Concur are already pre-aligned to a cost center. They're within defined budgets and supported by live visibility. What that reduces is, of course, the amount of time that you spend handling exceptions, reclassifying expenses manually, and reducing the complexity of reconciliation overall. And then when data flows from Concur into SAP's ERP or SAP S/4HANA, forecasting inputs get stronger because the exposure was visible earlier. So the shift that we're talking about is shifting from reactive governance to proactive control. So in a reactive model, spend happens, the expense is submitted into Concur, policy is applied, and exceptions get flagged. But in a proactive model, budgets are allocated in advance, controls are embedded at the time of payment, and spend is aligned to cost centers or projects at source. The review becomes validation, not discovery. And as I said, this does not replace Concur. What it reduces is the noise inside Concur. Digitization was step 1. Proactive spend control is step 2. Concur digitized expense management. Proactive spend control redesigns how we spend. And this is about, extending Concur's governance upstream. If control only begins at the time of submission of the expense, then finance remains reactive. If control begins at the time of payment, finance becomes predictive. And that's the evolution we're talking about. The value for finance and for employees is clear. You have controlled access to payment with compliance being proactive. Compliance aligns with policy as well as being proactive. So it's not just changing the timing, but you're aligned to corporate policy. This is providing a better experience for all your staff and also for the finance team. Visibility of any spending is instant, and the system is built to scale. So how do you set this up? The setup is via the Concur App Store. We are listed on the Concur App Store as a partner. I can't demonstrate this to you because I don't have a Concur login, but literally you log into the Concur App Center, log into your Concur environment, and then I think it's 3 clicks or maybe 4 clicks and you're done. You're set up with Soldo. Today you get a daily feed which is delivered at midnight, but very soon as we see the API update from SAP Concur, you'll get live notification of transactions. So what's next? We'd love you to contact us for a conversation or for a tailored demonstration that is designed for your environment and for your organization. And with that, I will say thank you very much for your time.